Here with me today to discuss operational taxes is Ian Bradley, partner and owner of Customer Tax and Operation Reporting Services globally and for the Americas within EY Financial Services Organization. Welcome, Ian. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Ian. It's a pleasure. Looking forward to spending a little time with you today.
Sure. I know you and I chat a lot about operational taxes. I'd like to just use the framework now, next, and beyond. Let's start with now and just tell me a little bit about what are some of the new challenges that people are facing now with respect to operational tax.
Excellent. A timely question. So let's begin by just level setting. When we think of operational tax, it means lots of different things to lots of different people. Many organizations think of operational tax as customer tax. We think of it as investor tax. Sometimes we think of it as participant tax. For the purpose of this conversation, let's just refer to it as operational tax. And one of the things that's important, is you look at the slide before you, the realm of the space is everything from client onboarding to AML, KYC, document collection validation, to monitoring change in circumstances, to withholding, remittance, all the way to reporting. That's the life cycle that we're going to be referring to today. And I think what's important as we start evaluating the disruption and the challenges is, on a normal day, what's good look like? And at the end of the day, the mission is to comply with the requirements to document and classify and withhold and report on customers or investors or participants across all required tax jurisdictions. And their scorecard is to make sure they're compliant, it's timely, that they manage costs, and they enhance or protect the customer or investor or participant experience. Now, in a normal day, the challenges are data, it's quality, it's issues. It's the push and pull between manual processes and procedures. It's disparate data sources and systems. It's legacy technology and processes, and it's resource availability and skill sets. And that's just a normal day in the life of operational tax. COVID-19 and the pandemic and all of the disruption that we're feeling has created tremendous stress in the operational tax space. And a lot of it's been caused by the remote working conditions, as you might imagine. If you think back against that life cycle, there's a lot of handoffs and processes that take place. And whether we like it or not, there's lots of paper still involved in the process, and there's lots of manual handling of documents and data throughout that process. So it's a recipe for challenges and issues when suddenly someone says everyone must go home, but we still need to maintain our responsibilities. So volume and frequency of printed forms is going to be a variable. You've got reliance on mail, manual processes. Many organizations that may have said, hey, over the years, lower cost alternative, let me invest in or let me explore a nearshore or an offshore resource or a contractor to help us. Again, significantly impacted. The reliance on tools and technologies that aren't portable. Some organizations are, using OCR scanners for converting paper documentation to something digital for them to use. Yet, in many cases, the technology they're using in the office isn't transportable, yet they can't go into the office. So at the end of the day, some organizations were business as usual with a lot of stress in the process, inefficiencies, and not nearly as timely compliance as they'd like, all the way to the other extreme where many organizations, literally their process stopped and they could not complete the entire process of operational tax. And then you had organizations that are all over the middle of that sphere, if you will.
Wow. It's always so interesting to me when you and I talk about operational tax. It's just the manual touching that still happens in operational tax is always mind-blowing to me, because most tax organizations now have gone to, or they're looking towards, a more automated, non-paper driven process. So why does operational tax get a little left off the grid sometimes?
Well, it's a fabulous question. And for those that are listening to our voices right now who are in the space, are probably chuckling and they understand it. For everybody else, they're scratching their head and saying there must be a problem. The reality of it is the operational tax space doesn't control the input. The input is coming from, in many cases, a customer or a participant or an investor or an entity. And therefore, they're in control of what they give you. And in many cases, what are they giving you? They're giving you paper. And you're not going to change what you get from them. That sets in motion a significant disadvantage for an organization to be able to revolutionize their process, see all kinds of efficiencies, or eliminate a lot of this manual handling. The other thing you obviously have is many of these processes were put in and evolved over the last 10, 15 plus years ago. And it's probably an appropriate analogy is any one of us listening on this recording buys a wonderful starter home, really falls in love with the neighborhood and everything about it, but you need more space. So you think about buying or renovating, and you renovate, and you add another room, and then you kind of outgrow it a little bit more, and then you add another room, and then you kind of need something else, and you add something else to it. And by the end of the day, you've done a lot of work, and you've been able to continue to satisfy what your needs were. But when you ultimately kind of go back at the finished product and say, is this what you would have designed from the get-go? And the answer is generally no. And so it works, it's viable, it's serving a purpose, but it's really not optimal. And in many cases, parts of a legacy system that you've otherwise augmented as time has passed on continues to be a vulnerability or a element that requires separate processing or manually processing. And it's very difficult internally to get the funding and the support to go revolutionize early processes that someone would say there's really not an ROI or a cost benefit for us to invest that time and energy.
I really loved that analysis of the house and the remodeling. And I appreciate telling our audience around why the manual handling. It's obviously not the operational tax group's choice. It's happened to them and they have to deal with it. I guess moving on a little bit into next on the now, next, and beyond framework that we're talking about today, there are a few businesses that are not experiencing this significant business disruption, this manual paper handling. Can you give some insights into how they got there and why?
Yeah, again, it's a very appropriate question to ask because I think all of us are looking around in personal lives and professional lives and saying, how did I fare and how did my peers fare? And I think in this space, the first thing to understand and recognize is there's certain parameters that are going to be relevant in the ultimate tale of the tape of how you endured or how you are enduring. Number one, the complexity, sophistication, the volume of your organization is going to be key in the tax operation space. Number two is the reliance on what you do in-house versus outsource versus some kind of hybrid. And then what is the degree of investment that has occurred around the strength of your processes or the integration of technology? And then lastly, what's the percentage or allocation between automation and manual? So you would think, again, in that first category, that complexity, sophistication, and volume, you would look at that one and say, that's an organization that's going to be pretty vulnerable. And the knee-jerk reaction is probably yes. But those organizations that have the complexity, the sophistication, the volume are generally the ones that probably would have been earlier movers to try to eradicate or minimize much of the manual handling and the paper documentation. Those are going to be organizations that probably going into this would have been more incentivized for taking paper and digitalize it as early, as quickly as possible, or incentivize their customers or investors or participants to have given them something that would have been received as electronic. And then I think you've got challenges around more manual and less integration of process and automation are going to create a higher degree of vulnerability. So am I saying that some organizations did it right and were well prepared and others weren't? The answer is no. As we've talked about, the process of the operations is really a manifestation of an evolution of where they've kind of come from, what they had to work with. Acquisitions are going to play a big role in the scenario in terms of what they've had to digest over the years. And their process is really going to be a blueprint of their history. And unless there was, and this is a generalization, unless there was some real motivating factor to upscale or revolutionize or really alter the existing processes, most organizations, operational tax space has generally remained relatively unchecked, other than some integration of automation, some upscaling of new technologies or processes as they've become available. But unless there was a real triggering event or a real fail or a real pressure on cost or something, most organizations have not heavily invested in the space. The key was, are we doing it? Are we getting it done on time? Is it correct? Are we compliant? Those are, back to that scorecard, those elements are a driving force here. And the cost associated with the department in many cases is not one in terms of overall magnitude of size, is going to be the one that kind of catches somebody's eye internally and say, well, this is the first place over the years that we should be thinking about, cost improvement. It's usually not. And it's hard to really itemize the cost in between procedures that need to happen and procedures that necessarily could be automated.
So the items that could be automated, can you give me a little bit about what processes or technologies that we've started to have and within your global remit that are available kind of right now?
Yeah, so I think what you're going to hear in this space is the form validation process is very early. As you kind of go back to that earlier slide where we had the timeline of the process, the validation of forms is a critical element in everybody's process. And that historically, because we've received paper, generally has been a relatively manual process. There have been some innovations in terms of technologies that folks use, and there's a number of products that are on the market that organizations leverage. But many of them, there's still a manual process in order to take something that's paper, to get it into some kind of technology, to get it into your process. It's better than pure manual handling, but it really, up to many situations, really hasn't been optimal. Where there really is now what I will call a breakthrough, and where I think the validation space is being revolutionized to the point where, I won't coin a phrase, but it's really a no-touch process, is if you can get your customers to give you electronic and you have the right technology, and we at Ernst & Young have recently developed, we call it electronic tax form validation, or the acronym is eTFV, that can digest electronic directly from the customer and then process it all the way through to reporting, all electronically, doing all the validation through logic without any manual touching. And that has taken out a significant amount of inefficiency, cost, non-value add out of the process. It's provided controls, it's provided governance, it's provided quality. And I think that product, if you will, that offering in that space, I think is probably the epitome of where we're going to see over the remaining couple years in this tax space, where you're going to see innovations really trying to target the process and try to tie in the access of data from one step to process it without handling, to then feed the next step in the process, and then provide the kind of controls that organizations are looking for to make sure that they are, again, back to the scorecard, Are we compliant? Do we have governance? Are we on time? And are we managing cost?
I love the scorecard concept. I think it's really relevant right now, not only in the operational tax space, but we've also talked about it just from a holistic tax perspective. And operational taxes always get, in my mind, left off of the scorecard because they're complicated and they're hard.
Well, and you can't find operational tax in most organizations' org charts. You literally have to be a sleuth to be able to find it. And because of that, it's not necessarily an area that is top of people's minds in terms of where do we have room for improvement or where should we be making investments.
I absolutely agree with the org chart piece too. And I think that kind of moves us into a little bit about beyond. But on the org chart, when people don't have operational tax groups, especially within wealth and asset management and private equity and any smaller bank or insurance company, they don't have what's called a quote unquote tax operations group. I see that function of operational tax be bounced around from investor services to legal to onboarding. So with that in mind, as we talk and help our clients think about beyond, what can clients kind of prepare for? I mean, with what's to come, with what's going on in our entire country and globe right now, but also just with respect to operational taxes, they want to think 12 months and beyond, recommendations that you can provide there?
Yeah, let's peel that back a little bit because there's a lot. First, operational tax, if you can find it, by its very nature, is generally slower to adopt change. It will generally be more risk adverse. It'll be more uncomfortable with uncertainty. And all of that's because of the risk and the consequences of failure of them achieving their scorecard. So you just have to know that kind of going into it. It's not reluctance. It's not that folks that are in that area don't want to do much of what we're talking about. It's that the headwind of consistency in achieving that scorecard is paramount, and that change will generally enter variables into the process, and those variables can cause disruption to our confidence about achieving our objectives. So that's kind of a baseline you need to understand. And then you really have three things that have converged here that I think are going to, what I'll say, encourage and support tax operations to really think about and embrace evaluating changes to current state. First and foremost, you have the disruption that they've experienced with COVID, as we talked about earlier. It exposed vulnerabilities. It's caused departments and individuals in those departments to innovate, to work differently. And as a byproduct, it's allowed them to test and get comfortable with a degree of change that's generally not part of their daily routine. It's also highlighted the interest and the need for investment in the adoption of technologies and processes. It's brought to the forefront if they've had a vulnerability, if something wasn't working, smart people will ask a question, there must be a better way. And that then creates an exploration of, is it embracing better processes? Is it evaluating new technologies, new automation, et cetera? And then in the aftermath, number two, you've got organizations that are and will be under dramatic initiatives to save money internally. And there are, and many of the organizations, including our own, are looking at and thinking about how do we evaluate our business and how do we do it smartly? And that is a progressive initiative that most, if not all, organizations will be going through, all to different degrees. And I think with that type of quest internal to an organization, it may, and in many cases has and will, be a responsibility for department heads to be looking and saying, is there a better way for us to comply with our obligations, our scorecard, but to be able to do it in a cheaper way? And obviously, the embracing of technologies and automation will certainly be at play, thinking about whether this is something that we as an organization should be doing, or could we rely on somebody else, a partner, to do this for us? And then the third one is the concept of, over the past few years, you've had many organizations that have transitioned their in-house corporate tax function to a managed service or an outsourcing model to gain efficiencies or access to the state-of-the-art technologies and talent, all while trying to manage costs. That same phenomenon is now coming to the theater near us around tax operations. Mm-hmm. And big organizations and small organizations across all sectors in financial services are asking the question of, is there an alternative for us owning this responsibility? And can we find a trusted partner that can provide some part of our journey for us? I'll say modular, or can they provide a full end-to-end experience for us? And I think if you look at the illustration in front of you, you'll see a rendition in the world according to Ernst & Young of how we are viewing our relationship with our clients and how we are leading with innovation and technology in providing both modular as well as end-to-end capabilities for our clients that are looking for what I'll say relief in this area. It may be a particular area like we talked about earlier around tax form validation. That may be an area that's just not working really well for them, or they want to improve it, or they're not happy with their current processor and vendor, or simply they're just looking for a better product at a lower cost, let's assume. And it could be as easy as implementing one technology into a client's existing process. It also could be looking at the process more holistically, kind of a target operating model assessment, if you will, and saying, here's our end-to-end process. What's working well? What's working efficiently? What are we happy with? What parts of this need to be improved? Either lower the cost, more efficiency, more capacity, better visibility, higher controls. And you can redesign the process. You keep the pieces that really, really work well, that are key. And what you do is then build around and you implement new automation and technology where possible. And you build better processes, better visibility, better visualizations, add in data analytics to get a better sense and monetize the data that you have in order to make better decision making. Part of the strategy that we have is really multifold. One, this is not a tax conversation. This is not an operations conversation. This is not a technology conversation. It's all three. You have to have folks and a team that have expertise across that spectrum. We are talking about tax. You need deep tax expertise, both in terms of the process and the advice we provide, as well as the logic that drives the automation, the tools that we introduce to our clients. From an operations perspective, you have to understand a day in the life of the customer or client that we're trying to serve. We need to understand the flows, the processes, the challenges, and the needs for controls and governance. And then on the technology side, you have to have state-of-the-art tech. And you have to be able to marry those three in order to be able to design a process or a solution for a particular client, depending on what they're trying to resolve. Now, if you just walked into this and you said, well, organization, what's your challenge? And we'll try to come up with a fix for you, it would probably be effective. What we've done is for years, we have worked with clients providing advice and bespoke solutions to solve complex organizational challenges in the tax operational space. And we've spent so much time and we've become so good at it that we've realized that based on that learning and that knowledge that's been imparted to us, we've decided to design tools and processes that really become best in class and really, in my mind, revolutionize many elements of this life cycle that our clients require to maintain, but at the same time are looking to enhance a customer experience while at the same time being compliant and focused on responsible cost and savings management.
Wow, that was really well said. And I think probably one of the best on-demand ones that we've done thus far because it's so all-encompassing. There's certainly a lot of processes and technologies here that companies can utilize and start to think about now, but then also really plan for using the scorecard you talked about, what's to come next and how to start to innovate and automate for beyond. So really, really informative, and appreciate you coming on today. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Ann. It was a pleasure.
So thank you all for listening, and please stay connected with us on EY.com for future editions of this series, as well as all of our thought leadership. For questions, please contact your EY relationship partner, Ian or me. Until then, everybody be safe.